In Chabad, they have regular seders in Mishnah Torah and study the Rambam. And the Rabbi was very strong into learning the Rambam. But what is the relationship of how Chabad follow halacha to the Rambam? Is that too big of a question? In terms, is it too global? Because sometimes it seems like a lot of people mention them, not just even Chabad, but people don't really seem to pay attention to him when it comes to actually following his...
The Rambam has gained in most Jewish circles like an honorary position as the Queen of England. He waves to everybody quotes him, everyone's looking him up, and nobody follows him. It's what? Except for the Yemenites, right?
That's right.
And I have to say, the Sfaradim, today I was teaching one of my students, we were learning over Skype, and I said, Chazon Ish has a famous letter, which he says, Maran is like, obnoxiously follows the Rambam. Rabbi Yosef Karo, almost always says Psiskei Halachah like the Rambam. Certain times he disagrees, but almost always. The Rambam is not this like concept. It's not a theory. It's not a. Right. Sure, he's a world philosophy of the Rambam, but push comes to shove. Either you accept the Rambam as one of the greatest rabbis who ever lived, or he's just another rabbi. And it's okay for you to say he's another rabbi if your tradition is otherwise. But if you're going to convince me that I should spend time from my day every day to read his books, and I should quote him every time I study halakha, and I should look at his books every time I study Talmud, but then comes time to practice, I can't follow him. So what is he really? What are his writings really? And it's a critique that many people have, not just on Chabad. The Briskers, they love the Rambam. They love dealing with the Rambam, learning the Rambam. Comes to halakha, sorry, our minhag is not like the Rambam. So what do you spend your whole life studying the Rambam's books for? What's the point?
True.
And I think that in certain circles they've divorced the Rambam from Rambamism. They divorced the Rambam, the posek, from Rambam, the thinker, or the philosopher. And the reason why they stay away from the Rambam is because they really don't know how to reconcile the two. The Rambam is a scary person to read about. He is the antithesis of Orthodox Jewry of 2016. He's the opposite. Everything that we're wrong, he is right about. And when people study him, you'll hear, study the Rambam's Mishnah Torah, but don't look into his Moreh Nevuchim.
Right.
His Guide to the Perplexed is too complicated. Study the Rambam, but don't read his letters. They're not relevant to you. So what am I don't know. It's like half of the Rambam I should read. I should read about his works, but not about his life, and not about how he thought. No. And that's the way the world treats the Rambam. And the communities that treat the Rambam that way will ultimately have to face the Rambam one day and explain themselves to him. But we don't suffer. Not here. We don't suffer from that. I'm grateful to groups like Chabad or the Briskers that even study the Rambam. That's better than some other people. There's a group of Hasidim that they say that you should burn the Rambam's books.
Still?
It's like, we're 1,000 years past that. Remember, where that was so 1,000 years ago. They're still up to that. So what can I do with such people? I'm at least grateful that people study. But someone who really appreciates the Rambam, even when I have to follow halakha like Rabbi Yosef Karo, not like the Rambam, it hurts me inside. It pains me to not have to listen to the Rambam.
Some of the Sephardim now call this as Maimonidean Sephardic rabbis.
Right, so this is also it's a different problem. This movement is actually born out of Ashkenaz, not out of Sephardic communities. Yeah, and my opinion, of course, I can't tell you what's fact. Judaism, 2,000 years later, has been so misconstrued and superstitious, and is so not rational and not logical and not sane and not balanced, that people see the Rambam, whoa, let's run to the Rambam, let's do everything like the Rambam. And what they failed to realize was the Rambam was a rabbi of a Sephardic community. The Rambam lived in a Sephardic country. Many of the Kabbalists that they try to run away from to the Rambam are influenced by the Rambam's teachings. They would consider themselves indirectly students of the Rambam. And they essentially create a whole new worldview that they would dub rationalist Maimonidean thinking that I don't know the Rambam would subscribe to. I don't know. I don't purport to be an expert in Rambam.
Well, maybe a little reductionist with how he really was.
Sure. I think the Rambam was greater than they would like to limit him to. And it only goes when you look into books. I just yesterday read an article from a Mekubal about the Zohar's damage to Kabbalah. which might sound very funny to you. Essentially, his whole premise is Kabbalah was very Maimonidean until the Zohar came out, in which many things went into a different direction. I'm not sure I agree with his theory. I'm just thinking it out loud with you.
Practical Kabbalah from the Rambam?
Not from the Rambam, but he, for example, brings Rabbi Avram Abulafia. Chesed Avraham, and he claims that Rabbi Avram Abulafia uses the Rambam as the stepping stools to Kabbalah. Like you must justify your Kabbalistic worldview against the Rambam. You can't veer from his path.
Interesting.
And he might be right in this regard, that the world kind of took a turn to a different direction.
Well, he talks about the Maaseh Merkavah at the beginning of Moed Nebuchim.
Yes. Yes.
To teach one-on-one.
And he kind of wants to separate this between what he calls prophetic Kabbalah, like what the Rambam mentions about Nivuah and the Galgalim, the different versus, classic Kabbalah today, which is like 10 Sfirot, 13 attributes, those worlds, the 4 worlds, that kind of Kabbalah to the different Kabbalah. I'm not a Mekubal, but I can tell you when it comes to halachot. In Kehillat is a good example. We have a rule. I believe this rule is brought down. Don't hold me to it. I believe it's brought down in a book called Eretz HaChaim by Rabbi Chaim Satan. It was one of the early Sephardic rabbis in Israel, in which he says that wherever Maran doesn't give an opinion, it could be that I'm not correct about Rabbi Eretz HaChaim. Could be the Knesset Agdula that I'm quoting, Rabbi Chizkiyahu de Silva. Don't hold me to it. You look it up on your own, or ask me to bring the source again. He says wherever Maran doesn't give an opinion, you always follow the Rambam. So, for example, wherever Maran doesn't mention what to do, for example, Maran just mentioned Kehillat. You'll notice Maran doesn't tell you how to tie Kehillat, or which way to tie Kehillat, or how many strings. There are different opinions. Some say 1, some say 2, some say 4. We're going to see tomorrow, B'ezrat Hashem. When I saw this, it was a no-brainer for me that because Maran didn't say, that he would want me to default back to the Rambam. The Rambam says 1 string out of 8 strings, so that's what we do. There are many such things. Maran doesn't talk about Mashiach. So he expects you, when you learn Hilchot Mashiach, to learn it from the Rambam, not from somebody else. Maran doesn't talk about belief in Hashem. And that might find funny,
so
but he
does. No section on Mashiach.
No, okay, the Shulchan Aruch was written for the Jew in exile. It doesn't have a part. Also living in Israel, but not when the Geulah is here. No laws of the Beit Mikdash. Doesn't have laws of purity and impurity. No laws of kings. No laws of many things that Maran doesn't deal with, which the Rambam does. There's a book called Aruch HaShulchan. You've heard me quote him before. Rabbi Epstein was one of the greatest Ashkenazi commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch before the Mishnah Berurah. In certain yeshivot, they actually only study his writings in Shulchan Aruch. He has something called an Aruch HaShulchan La'atid. It's called the future Shulchan Aruch. Like for when Mashiach comes, how are we going to do things? A very interesting book. I don't own it. I used to own it, but I don't own it today. Many of my books were lost on the way over from Israel to San Diego. But an incredible work of what's the world going to look like when Mashiach comes, and what halachot do you have to know for when that happens.
But it's not a Hillel versus Shammai type of thing.
No.
Just like we always hear that Loma Ba, we will hold like Shammai, not like Hillel.
We hear such things. I don't even know that it's true. Some Kubalim might have said such a thing. I don't know that it's a fact that way.